Welcome to the first and only Social Science Division Professorial Lecture Series event of the 24-25 academic year. This lecture series honors the faculty at Hope College within social sciences who were promoted to full professor in the previous academic year. Our colleagues in Arts and Humanities host a similar lecture series, and we have completely copied their excellent idea. I hope you'll be on the lookout for next year's lecture series as well. My name is Lindsay Ritluna. I serve as the Dean of Social Sciences here at Hope College, and I am honored to introduce my colleague and my friend, Dr. Daryl Van Tongeren, as our speaker today. Dr. Van Tongeren joined Hope College in 2012, which happens to be the same year that I joined Hope College in the same department, psychology. He earned his bachelor's degree from Colorado Christian University, his master's degree in experimental psychology from the University of Colorado, and his PhD in experimental social psychology from Virginia Commonwealth University. He has a faculty appointment in the psychology department, and he currently serves the social science division, Hope College, and the Holland community as the director of the Frost Center for Social Science Research. Dr. Van Tongeren's scholarly record is staggering. He has over 210 peer-reviewed articles, with around 113 of those published in 2018 or later, since he received tenure and was promoted to associate professor. He has 4 books and an extensive presentation list. Beyond his dissemination record, Daryl has been highly successful in grant procurement, about $12 million overall, and about 1.5 of that directed to Daryl as principal or co-investigator. As one of his departmental colleagues remarked when writing his promotion to full professor letter, they started, "To begin with the confession, I found it a little challenging to write this letter, not because I have nothing to say, but because I wasn't sure what I could add that isn't already widely known." Dr. Van Tongeren's reputation precedes him. Even a cursory glance at his CV makes it clear that he is in a league of his own when it comes to scholarship. Indeed, every one of Daryl's departmental colleagues commented on his impressive record and his skills as a scholar. His work has spanned topics from meaning in life, religion, forgiveness, humility, and I know he plans to talk a bit about that work on Flourishing tonight. But beyond what's on the page, Daryl has invested in the psychology department, in the social sciences, in the students of Hope College, in the institution, in the Holland community, and in his discipline in multiple ways. He shared his expertise in the department regarding teaching pedagogy, his knowledge of social science research with colleagues, and certainly within our community. He's been an instrumental part of making sure research is done in an ethical way at Hope College, serving on the board of the Human Subjects Review and chairing it for multiple years. He also served the institution as the interim associate provost from 2021 to 2022. I am personally grateful for the many ways he makes Hope College and all of our community a better place. I'm excited to learn from him today, and I invite you to join me in welcoming Dr. Daryl Van Tongeren.
Thank you so much. Grateful to be here. Thanks for sharing your evening with me. I think I'd just like to start off with just some gratitude. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for a lot of people in my life who sacrificed in order for me to be here. And so I'm grateful to 2 very supportive mentors during my undergraduate period, Dr. Sherry Parks and Dr. Daniel McIntosh, who really invested in me to help me kind of fall in love with the research and cultivate that. I'm grateful for 2 mentors during my master's program, Kelly Clevey and Tom Pazinski, who helped me kind of focus my research areas. And then I'm very grateful for Jeff Green and Ev Worthington of Virginia Commonwealth University, who saw promise in me and encouraged me to pursue my research passions. I'm also very grateful for collaborators. I tend to think of science as a team sport. It's something that is best done with other people. I've been very fortunate to collaborate with dozens of collaborators from 5 different continents, and dozens of very intelligent, capable, successful undergraduate student collaborators, some of whom are in this room today. I'm very grateful for you all. And I've had 2 very consistent collaborators who have become friends. And I'm very grateful for that. So 2 colleagues that I met in graduate school, Donnie Davis and Josh Hook. We're grateful that we were able to work together, we become friends. I've been at their weddings, and we've even managed to like each other so much that we wrote a book together on how to do research. And so this is a book for psychology majors and graduate students on just some of the tips that we've learned over the years. I'm grateful for the funding support I've received from different funders, most notably the John Templeton Foundation, and then also Hope College through their support. And then finally, the biggest area of gratitude I have is for my wife. It's for Sarah. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. So grateful to have a partner who supports me so much and who challenges me so much. If any of the ideas in here are any good, it's thanks to her. And so I'm very grateful for that. Some people are very worried that AI is going to take over many professions, education included. And so I asked AI to summarize my research program over the past 20 years and put it into a picture. And this is what it came up with. So I figured we'll just take the rest of the hour kind of meditating on this. Yeah, we'll just... Okay. Yeah, we're doing so well.
It's over.
You see what happens when you mention AI? All right, so we're just going to meditate on this. AI has summarized my research program. Before I get started, I just thought I'd let you know a little bit more about me, because you might think, oh, here's this old professor. He always knew what he wanted to do in life. No, not at all. I am a first-generation college student. My father was a diesel mechanic for LA County, and my mom was a teaching assistant for an elementary school. College was kind of on the radar, but not really. And so I did the very bold thing of going away to college 1 hour away, because for me that really felt like the bold move to do. Far enough away the parents can't stop by, but close enough you can do your laundry. I went on and I earned a master's degree, like Lindsay said, University of Colorado Springs, and then my PhD at Virginia Commonwealth University. And really the one thing that's anchored all of my questions has been this: what makes for a meaningful life? And maybe this is because I'm an existentially angsty person, right? Maybe others of you are like, I know what the meaning is. I don't have to think about this. But this is what haunts me in a good way and keeps me up and motivates my research. And so really, I'm going to talk about 3 big ideas tonight, because I figure that's about what we can handle, and then we'll call it a night. The first big idea is, why are we motivated to perceive our life as meaningful? And the culmination of this work led to a book that Sarah and I co-authored together in 2020 called The Courage to Suffer. It had to do with finding meaning in the midst of suffering, and this came out 5 days before the pandemic. I know, I wish I had a crystal ball, right? This would have been amazing. The second thing that I've looked at in my research is, what does it mean to live a good and virtuous life? And 2 years ago, in the summer of 2022, I published a book called Humble, which really focuses on the role of humility in flourishing. And then most recently, I've been asking the question, why are people religious? And is religion good or bad or both? And last summer, I published a book called Done, How to Flourish After Leaving Religion. So here's the first big idea, right? So for those of you who are taking notes, how many of you have to be here because of the class? I won't be offended. Great. And then some of you are just also not telling the truth. Okay, so for those of you who are taking notes, here's the first big idea. First big idea, number 1, everybody suffers. But how you suffer matters. Everybody suffers, but how you suffer matters. Suffering is a human universal, right? Thinkers, people way smarter than me, way long ago, have been trying to wrestle with why do people suffer? Religions have been founded around the idea of human suffering. So Buddhism tries to focus on human suffering. The first chronological book in the Christian Bible is Job. Right? That was a story about someone who was like, God made a cosmic deal with Satan, and now my life is terrible. Help me explain this suffering. So everybody suffers. And this was something that I was studying in a very abstract way, but in 2010, I got a phone call in early spring that changed my life. My brother, 7 years prior, had undergone an emergency surgery because he had an aortic dissection, which is a condition in which it's not a high likelihood that you survive. But in 2003, he beat the odds and he survived. So he calls me in 2010, letting me know that he has to have a routine follow-up surgery. And he reassures me the odds for this are much better. Right? So the first time he had this emergency surgery, his odds of survival were 5%. The odds of not making it were 95%. He beat the odds, he was in the 5%. He let me know he was going to have a routine surgery, follow up. The day of the surgery, we still don't hear anything, Fast forward 3 weeks, my brother passes away tragically. Again, he was in the 5%, but this time, the wrong 5%. And he left behind a wife and 3 children under the age of 6. And that really shattered a lot of the assumptions I had held about the world and how the world was supposed to work. Because I assumed good things happen to good people, my brother was good, I believed in a benevolent, loving God, and nothing bad should happen. And so it shattered my assumptions. But now, why is suffering a problem? Why did that pose a problem for me? Why does suffering pose a problem for most people? The reason why suffering poses a problem for people is it lays bare existential concerns. All right, you ready to get just a little depressed with me, and then we will get flourishing? Okay, is that okay? You gotta hang in there with me, don't check out. Okay, let's get depressed real quick. We're going to walk through and remember the 5 core existential concerns. So these are things that all humans have to come to terms with and come up with answers to. All right, here we go. Number 1, the first big concern is what's called freedom or groundlessness. We live in a world in which there are seemingly attractive competing alternatives, and we don't know what the right answer is. But we still have to make a decision and bear the responsibility of that decision. If you're unsure about this, how many of you have ever wondered, what am I doing after Hope College? Anybody? How many of you have ever been anxious about that? Anybody? All of you, exactly. So, we don't know what the right answer is, but we have to make a decision and live with those consequences. That's the first fear. The second is what's called existential isolation. What this means is all of us are phenomenologically isolated and separate from one another. We're all having unique phenomenological experiences right now. Some of you are wondering how much more depressing I'm going to get. Others of you are wondering if you wandered into the wrong talk. Some of you are wondering, can I leave right now? I'm wondering if they realize I'm really a nice guy. I'm just trying to break the mood with some humor here. What this means is that none of us can truly know what it's like to be anyone else. There's this unbridgeable gap between us and other people, which is why we always say things like, I just want to be seen. I just want to be validated. I want someone to know me. All right, the third thing is identity. We are always asking the question, who am I? And this identity changes over the arc of our developmental period. Right? We're always asking, who am I? So we're not sure what the right thing to do is. We're all isolated from everybody else. We don't know who we are. That's pretty terrifying. But the good news is, the one thing we're absolutely and surely certain about is that we're all going to die one day. So this mortality, right? I told you it's going to get better. So this is the one thing about which we're very certain. I notice the mood has gone very somber, which suggests to me some of you are sufficiently anxious and that these are indeed true fears. So death is the only certainty we have, and when all these things culminate together, we begin to wonder, is life just meaningless? Right? And so these are the questions that if you're anybody like me, on an evening in February, you're staring out the windows, the snow is coming down, and you're pondering these questions, wondering about the meaning of life and the meaning of death. All of these have the potential to create overwhelming anxiety among us humans. So why isn't it that we're just constantly gripped with anxiety and depression? How is it that we can function at all? Why is it the case that I guarantee you, as soon as you leave this talk tonight, none of you will be thinking about any of these big 5 fears? But later tonight, or maybe tomorrow, you're gonna remember this. Why is that? It's because in order to manage this anxiety, we create cultural worldviews. And we adhere to these cultural worldviews. And what these cultural worldviews do is they provide us with a sense of meaning that answer these core existential questions. My very first project in graduate school, my advisor allowed me to conduct an experiment where we subliminally threatened people's meaning in life by flashing subliminal messages on a computer screen suggesting that their life was meaningless. Don't worry, I got this approved by the ethics board. What we find is that after we threatened people's meaning, and this was faster than conscious awareness, they were unable to recognize what we were doing to them because we interviewed them. After this, they reported that their life had more meaning. So we're natural meaning makers. When we feel a threat, we double down and we say life actually has meaning. Now, defensiveness is our default. Anytime we feel like our sense of meaning is under threat, anytime existential concerns are made salient, we get defensive. My colleagues and I found that religion is one of the ways that we get defensive. When we reminded people of Ebola during the Ebola outbreaks, people got more defensive. And the sad part about this is it happens at all parts of the religious spectrum, whether you're religiously conservative or religiously liberal. We found that religiously conservative people don't like religiously liberal people. Religiously liberal people don't like religiously conservative people. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? Defensiveness is our default. But is it possible that there's another way to respond to these existential fears? And I think that there is. In graduate school, my colleagues and I did a study in which we reminded people that they were going to die, but then we asked them about forgiving someone who had hurt them. And what we found was that after we reminded people of these existential concerns, they were actually more likely to forgive people whom they loved, whom they were close to, and whom they were similar to. So reminding people about these big existential questions can actually elicit more positive or virtuous responses. And so one of the things that we take away from this is we realize that we're natural meaning makers, largely because meaning helps us navigate life. Right? We're meaning makers because it makes life manageable. So we tend to feel like life is meaningful when things make sense, right? The researchers call that coherence. When we feel like we have significance or value, right? Then we feel like we matter. And when we have a purpose, when we have this goal that is larger than ourselves. And so I like to think about meaning as social glue. It's something that holds our world together. And it answers these deep existential questions. Some of you are like, okay, we did get depressed, but weren't you talking about suffering? And at this point, I'll take suffering, because that seems less depressing than what you were talking about. What does this have to do with suffering? Suffering can undermine our sense of meaning, right? So cultural worldviews are systems of meaning. And if we encounter experiences that we can't explain or we can't integrate into our cultural worldview, it opens us up for considerable anxiety. So, for example, when my brother passed away tragically, and I had to re-examine a lot of the beliefs I had about whether or not the world is fair and just, about where was God during this tragedy, what was going to happen to these kids. What it did is it revealed the cracks, it undermined the assumptions that I had about the world. And if that means my cultural worldview can no longer address these core existential concerns, I'm prone to all kinds of anxiety. Right? And that's why suffering feels so bad. So Sarah and I wrote together during the pandemic. We applied this model that we developed in our book about how to suffer well during, right, and find meaning and flourish amid this global pandemic. So we applied our model of how to suffer well to the global health crisis. And what we found was that building meaning actually helps us suffer well. So because meaning is eroded during suffering, one pathway towards flourishing is to cultivate meaning in all of life's seasons, including suffering. So now I know that I promised lessons for a flourishing life. So it's time to start making this practical, all right? So how do we cultivate meaning and suffer well? We're going to talk about 5 things real quick, all right? We're going to talk about accepting rather than avoiding. We're going to talk about grief as love. We're going to talk about how to rethink and rebuild what we believe. We're going to talk about investing in our relationships and then going beyond ourselves. All right, number 1, how can you suffer well? The first way you can suffer well is accept rather than avoid. And I say this as a chronic avoider, as well as someone who has done research on this. So we have, I know, but yeah, people who know me well. Okay, we have plenty of cognitive distortions that lend us to see the world as we want it to be, rather than the way that it is. One of the best ways that we can metabolize our suffering is to accept it. And this is so hard, right? For us to accept, this is not the way I wanted my life to be. And this is the way my life is. Right? So in order, though, to accept it, and this is where I struggle, maybe many of you are much better, and none of you zone out on your phones or on Netflix, right? In order to accept the unpleasant, discomfort, weighty heft of this existential anxiety, you have to allow yourself to feel the full weight of that suffering. And that's what we run from. But when we run from the full weight of our suffering, that emotional distress, we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to accept it. Avoidance stagnates us and isolates us, but acceptance allows us to move toward growth. The second thing that I learned, and I learned this in part because I saw a great therapist, and I also learned this in part because this is where the research points, is that we should think about our grief as love. So many times suffering is about a loss, right? Suffering can be about the loss of a loved one, it can be losing what was, it can be losing what could have been. It's the loss of a hoped-for future. Maybe you thought your life was going to go a certain way and it didn't. The amount of grief we feel is directly bound to the amount of love we experienced. If you didn't grieve much, dare I'd say there wasn't a lot invested there. If tragically something happened to me tonight, right, and nobody grieved, I'd be like, well, that was disappointing, right? I want someone to miss me, maybe the dog, maybe the cat, right? They're going hungry at least. But we at least want there to be some grief because that's an indicator of how much we loved. The third way that we can suffer well is oftentimes we have to rethink what we've believed and then start rebuilding those. So if your assumptions about the way you think the world is supposed to work has been challenged by suffering, you may need to rethink those assumptions. That all sounds really good. Oh, Dr. Tongeren, I'm really big into critical thinking. Yeah, I like that. If you've, though, ever had to overhaul the way you understand the world and your belief system, that is painful. That is not easy. Take it from me and take it from the participants who have filled out our surveys and taken our studies. That is not an easy process. For some people, it looks like deconstructing, which means breaking down your beliefs and rebuilding them into something that better explains your suffering. Now, for some people, that might mean like wholesale change. That might mean I used to believe in A, and now I believe in Z. For other people, it might be a strong revision. I used to believe in A, and now I believe in A prime. Is that pretty close? Okay, great. Right, so it's a version of what I had before, but it's different. But if you keep on expecting the world to operate in a way that you know is not consistent with the evidence, you're going to get set up for continued pain and suffering moving forward. The fourth thing you can do is invest in relationships. Okay, here's what I want you to do. We're going to do a small activity, and you don't have to talk to anybody for all you introverts. Okay, I want you to think of the most meaningful memory in your life. Take a moment. Can you do that? The most meaningful memory of your life. Okay, you can open up your eyes again, hopefully you didn't fall asleep. How many of you, when you're thinking about the most meaningful memory, you were with or shared that with someone else? Can you raise your hand? Okay, that's like everybody, right? So, most of the time, we're not alone, right? Like, meaning is not found like by ourselves, right? We're not like, oh, the best thing ever was I was completely marooned on this island and no one talked to me. So like, that sounds great right now. Okay, but in the long term, relationships are the surest source of meaning consistently over time and across cultures. People are the greatest sources of meaning. We have this fundamental need to belong, right? We need other people. And I think this is especially true when we suffer. And so, for those of you who are experiencing suffering, I know that it can feel very isolating and you might not want to reach out to other people, right? And you're able to go on whatever time feels best for you. But do you know that being around other people can provide you this sense of meaning? Okay, for those of you who aren't suffering, but you know that your friend is suffering, this is where you need to pay attention, okay? Don't give them cheap platitudes that make you feel better. You hear what I'm saying? I don't want to hear any of this, oh, everything happens for a reason, right? Wrong, no. That's what you think, and the reason you're telling them that is because you're reassuring yourself that that's the way the world works. What most people want, if you read Job or you hung around anyone who's been suffering, you know what people want? They just want your presence, right? I remember one of the surest things that was so powerful to me. It was after my brother passed away. One of my good friends, Donnie, we wrote a book together, still collaborate. He picked me up and he said, we're gonna go to Chipotle. And we went, and you know, everyone was like, how are you doing? All, you know, he takes me to Chipotle, we just have our burrito, we sit there, we hang out. We didn't even talk much. And at the end, I was like, thank you, thank you. And you know what he said? He said, well, you know, a few years ago I knew this. He said, I lost my mom. and he had lost his mom to cancer. And he said, I just needed someone to kind of walk life with me. Because when you go through suffering, what happens is it opens you up to a vulnerable sense of compassion. And you can see other people who are suffering, and you want to meet them with a sense of vulnerability. Right? You're not trying to fix it for them, because you can't. Because to live is to suffer, right? And to live is also to experience joy. And sometimes those happen at the same time and in the same day. And so, by going through suffering, it opens you up to be vulnerable with other people and be compassionate with them. And then the last thing we know is that going beyond yourself is a really sure way of building meaning. So self-transcendence is this pathway to meaning. Life feels more meaningful, whether you find that in religion, whether you find that in volunteering or pro-sociality, whether it's joining a larger cause or helping other people. When you go beyond yourself, life just feels more meaningful. And so I had a very, very bright student, Megan Edwards, who did a senior thesis with me, who tested some of this. Because we were like, I think these are good ideas. And she's like, I'd like to do this. Now, I'll put this into perspective. Most students who do a senior thesis conduct one study, right, over the course of a year. Megan did 3. Okay? And not only that, she submitted the paper as a first author. And for those faculty members in the room, get ready for this. It was accepted without revision. It was the first time in my career it had happened, and it was one of our Hope students. And Megan went on, got her PhD, and she's now a postdoctoral scholar at Duke. Megan is going to do way better than me, by far. She's terrific. But what she found was, when we're able to make meaning, and she found this experimentally, she was clever enough to come up with a way to experimentally test, if you have people recall a time of suffering, and they can make meaning out of it, they report better mental health, fewer PTSD-related symptoms, less anxiety, less depression, and they're more satisfied with their life. We also have some research that shows building meaning when we're stressed out helps us, improves our health. It actually improves our immunological responses. So even on a cellular level, building meaning is helpful. All right, takeaway reminder number 1. A flourishing life is possible even when you're suffering. Suffering can be existentially unsettling, but how we suffer matters. And the way to think about how to suffer is to cultivate meaning rather than act defensively. So far, so good? All right, big idea number 2. A virtuous life is a good life. Okay? A virtuous life is a good life. Life is full of decisions, right? You have to make decisions. Are you going to share, or are you going to hoard your burger, right? Are you going to share your ice cream cone, or are you going to eat it all by yourself? Now, those decisions might fall under the purview of what we might think of as virtues. So what do we think of as virtues? They're those actions in which we restrain our ego or regulate our selfish motives for the benefit of other people. So what we want to do, right, is eat our roommate's chocolate cake that's in the fridge. At least that's what I wanted to do in college. Right? What I should do is not do that. Right? It should be respect my roommate's chocolate cake boundaries. That doesn't feel very fun, but what we know is that when we're able to rein in our selfish motives and we're able to self-regulate, it does lead to a greater and more meaningful life. So what do virtues do? Why should anyone be virtuous? Especially if you're like, I want to be virtuous for selfish reasons, which is ironic, but I'll give you that pass. So even if you want to be virtuous for selfish reasons, virtues signal to other people what it's like to be in a relationship with them. So we have some research that's found when people have a leader that's humble, they're more likely to trust that leader. And they say, oh, I can trust you because I know you're going to have my best interest in mind. You're going to value me as much as you value yourself. So the 2 main virtues that I've studied over my career are forgiveness and humility. And so forgiveness is where we replace our negative emotions and motivations toward either a neutral party, towards an offender, either back to neutral or towards positive. Right? So we move from anger, contempt, frustration, more towards empathy, kindness, compassion. And we have some research that suggests that forgiveness is really good for repairing relationships, it promotes social functioning, but we're likely to forgive when we value someone's relationship and they're unlikely to exploit us again in the future. Right? So if we don't value somebody and they're just going to keep taking advantage of us, we're probably not going to forgive them. And it's probably wise for us not to forgive them, right? If they're not going to respond to your forgiveness. Now, we know that forgiveness increases meaning in life. So my dissertation looked at, we brought dating or married couples into the lab. They had to be together for at least 6 months. We had them fill out surveys. This was another great study. Every 2 weeks for 6 months, we asked them, has your partner committed any of these offenses? Right? We gave them a whole list of offenses. Yeah, some of you are getting it, right? Some of you are like, they signed up for this? Yeah, we paid them. It's great. We paid them. And so they listed all the things their partner did, and didn't do. And then we found out how much they forgave their partner for those things. And we could, we got both partners in the dyad, right? So we could see how much they were offended, how much they forgave. And what we found was that where there was consistent forgiveness in that relationship, if I consistently forgave my partner, it increased my meaning in life from before to after. Meaning in life went up. Why? Because remember, relationships are the ocean of meaning, right? They're the biggest source of meaning. And if I can get in a right relationship, a right standing with my partner, life's just going to feel more meaningful. We know that forgiveness is important for healing and addressing group conflict. So we've looked at intergroup forgiveness, right? So this is forgiveness on more of a societal or national scale, where there have been mass atrocities. And we know that some components of intergroup forgiveness include things like building trust, and when the offending partner, or offending group expresses guilt and remorse. We also know that forgiveness can be oriented or directed towards the self. So I had another really bright student, Sarah Peterson, who did a senior thesis, who went on, got her PhD, now she works for the VA. And she looked at the benefits of self-forgiveness on mental health. And what she found was that when there's proper self-forgiveness, not too quick, right? This is not condoning. This is not like, I hurt someone, oh, I forgive myself. But this is actually proper, effective, thorough self-forgiveness. It's related to better mental health, to less disordered eating, and lower self-condemnation after people have a drinking-related transgression. So being able to forgive oneself and stop that cycle of shame and rumination can help us improve our mental health. So forgiveness is what I started doing my research on in graduate school around virtue. But then I started getting interested in humility because we started realizing that what are the components that make people likely to forgive? And what we found is it was that offenders took responsibility. They said, you know what, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. They were contrite. They owned their limitations. And so we said, well, that sounds a lot like humility. And now, most scholars kind of laughed at the idea of empirically measuring humility, right? Because you can imagine if you give someone a humility scale and they say they're high on humility, well, how do you interpret that, right? If someone says, I'm the best at humility, no one's more humble than me, probably not, right? Probably not. But if they say they're really low on humility, well, I don't know, maybe they know, maybe they've gotten feedback. So this was the measurement paradox that we were facing, but maybe we had a lot of unearned confidence of youth, we decided to tackle it. So we decided to start looking at humility. And the way we kind of think about humility is about being the right size in a situation. Not too big, but also not too small. So the ditch on one side that everyone's aware of is arrogance, right? That's being too big in a situation. But there's also another ditch on the other side, and that's being too small, being self-deprecating. So for those who want a more sophisticated way of thinking about this, this is like Aristotelian virtue ethics, right? This is the golden mean. For those of you who are like, Era who? It's the Goldilocks, right? Not too hot porridge, not too cold porridge, just right. And humility has 3 components. It's an accurate view of yourself, so knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. It's being able to restrain your ego, so reeling your selfishness. And it's treating other people's and viewing them as equal to you, viewing their needs as important as your own. So what does humility actually do for us? Humility is powerful and it helps us create new relationships, right? So it helps us bond in our relationships. It helps when there's a power differential. And it also improves our well-being. So we've done some research that looks at humility helping us form social bonds. So we did a study in which we got undergraduate students together and we had them do all kinds of difficult tasks, like answer questions from the GRE. Or they did this one activity that's called crash landing on the moon. And so we say, okay, there are 60 items. And imagine you crash land on the moon. You can only pick 20 of these 60 items. Discuss in your group which 20 it's going to be. Surprisingly, students have very strong opinions on which 20 items you need for a crash landing on the moon. Then after that, they rank what it's like to work in a group together, and what we find is that people want to be friends with the person who's rated as humble relative to someone who's rated as arrogant. Well, we thought, well, that's great. I'm glad that people want to be friends with humble people. But now, surely it's not the same, when it comes to, I don't know, dating relationships, right? We want to date the person, the life of the party, the narcissist who comes in and dumps the punch bowl in somebody's head. That's who I want in a relationship, right? Some of you are like, no, you don't want that. Yeah, you must have read the paper. Okay, so what we did was we created some dating profiles. And we had people come to the lab and we had them rate these dating profiles. Some were arrogant, some were humble. Time and again, they want the humble partner. I mean, they rated this person, were attractive, they were more willing to share their phone number with them, they're more willing to meet them outside the lab and actually go on a date with them. Because if you think about it, over the long term, we want someone who's going to listen to us, who's going to care about us, and who's going to treat us as an equal. So we also know that humility makes relationships better, it enhances commitment, it enhances relationship satisfaction. We also know that it reduces defensiveness. One of my favorite studies that my students and I came up with was we were trying to figure out if humility would actually make us less defensive. And so we concocted this idea where we would threaten participants' viewpoints by having them write this essay. We said, write something you really care about. And then they exchanged that essay with who they thought was another student they were working with, but it was really just one of our research assistants pretending to be another student. And they wrote all kinds of horrible feedback for their essay. They said, this is a horrible idea, who would ever believe this type of thing? Really just kind of insulted them. Then we had them give feedback to the other partner's essay. And we said, okay, now that was part one of the study, so everyone kind of got ticked off at this other partner. We said part two of the study, we don't really want to have to go to far lengths to kind of do this next part, so we're just going to keep you working in pairs. There's another professor who wants to do a study on taste testing. So one of you is going to be the food preparer, and one of you is going to be the food eater, right? One of you makes the food, the other one eats the food. We don't know which is going to be which, so write down your food preferences. So if this is weird, they wrote down their food preferences. Then they come out and write, okay, you draw out of a hat, and everybody picks that they're going to be the food preparer. Okay, so everyone's trekking along. You're working with someone who really insulted you that you don't like. Then you find out you get to prepare their food. Then they hand you their food preference sheet, and this is all rigged. And they like salty food, they like sweet food, they like all kinds of fruits, veggies. The one thing they don't like, spicy food. Right? They hate spicy food. They even wrote, I hate spicy food. Okay, great. Then we have them go into the next room. We're like, okay, you're the food preparer. We want you to randomly select out of these two hats, two things to prepare. And we rigged it. One was always crackers, and the other one, always hot sauce. So everyone's trekking along so far. You've got someone who really doesn't like you. They've insulted you. You now have all this power over them because you're preparing their food and you get to dole out the hot sauce. And we said one more thing. All the food you prepare, they have to eat. So what we did was we measured the amount of hot sauce people doled out as a measure of aggression of how ticked off they were at someone who impugned their worldview. And what did we find? The people that we had made humility cognitively salient, and we did this through that implicit priming technique, when we made humility salient, they actually gave less hot sauce to the person who made them mad and threatened them, relative to the other students who just loaded it up. Now, there was one student who got confused and she ate all the food, even though she wasn't sick, but that's okay. We made a note of that in the paper. So humility actually can reduce our defensiveness. We also were curious, okay, that's great, that's in the lab, but what about the real world? Can it help us when we're really, really stressed out? And so we figured, well, we have to figure out if humility can help us, but how do we know when people are going to get stressed? How can you predict stress? And there was a grad student in the lab who was like, what's really stressful is having your first child. And so the advisor said, let's write a grant. So we tracked people before their first child was born, okay, and in the last trimester, and then again at age 3 months, 9 months, and 21 months. Okay? I've heard that's pretty stressful, that transition to parenthood. What we find is when both partners are humble, both partners, they report less anxiety, less stress, and they have an overall better adjustment to parenthood. We followed this up by bringing, in another study, we brought partners into the lab and we had them write down their biggest areas of disagreement. This is also, we got approved from the ethics board. Then we hooked them up to blood pressure machines and we said, go ahead and discuss these biggest areas of disagreement, right? So basically get into an argument and we'll check back in with you in 10 minutes. When both partners were humble, they had better physiological, better cardiological responses to those disagreements. So humility actually is good for our health. But humility does have dark side. So we learned this from another bright student, senior Carolyn Preby, in her thesis. She, in a very kind, compassionate way, said, Dr. Tongeren, this is all well and good. I am sure you love humility, but let's just be honest. You're a white male, and you kind of have a lot of privilege and power. Why wouldn't you go around telling other people to be humble? I was like, ooh, Carolyn, you're right. We should study that. And what she said was, humility lands differently for women than it does for men. There's a double standard, and I think we should study that. And so Carolyn wrote up the study, conducted it. It worked like a charm. I mean, these are one of those studies, like, it's predicted, right? You put in the hypothesis, it comes out, and you're like, this is how it should always work. It was like a textbook. Sadly, though, what she found is that women pay a steeper price for arrogance. And it's not even arrogance, sharing their accomplishments. They're viewed as more humble than men who share the exact same accomplishments. And the biggest offenders of who say that they're arrogant are men. Right? So the world is slanted against, right? There's a gender bias against women. They pay a higher price for humility. They're expected to be more humble, and when they're not, they're viewed as disproportionately more arrogant. Another dark side of humility we found is that when you admit that you might be wrong about life's biggest questions, right? These existential issues, we ask people, consider what happens after you die. Okay? How willing are you to change your mind on that? People who are more willing to change their mind, admit that they could be wrong, that's undermining for them. They have lower well-being. Okay, so how do we start cultivating these virtues? I promised that this would be practical. The first thing you can do is actually make forgiveness a practice. My old advisor, Ed Worthington, came up with what's called the REACH model for forgiveness. He says in this, you recall an offense where someone has hurt you. You empathize with the offender. This is where we lose a lot of people. They're like, empathize? No. They were completely in the wrong. I did nothing wrong. I've never been wrong in my entire life. Right? So the empathy part is acknowledging that maybe at some point in your life you have hurt someone too, and you can empathize how they might have felt when the tables were turned, and that you could give them the altruistic gift of forgiveness. That's the A, altruistic gift of forgiveness. Because it's a gift, you don't have to do it, but it's altruistic when you do. You can commit to forgiving and then hold on when doubts arise. And then you can, and this can, change your life and free you from unforgiveness, which often hurts you more than it hurts them. How do we cultivate humility? The first thing that you can do is you can seek feedback. Right? If you're not sure how humble you are, you can ask somebody. I will warn you, though, as someone who has done this, you need to be prepared for what you are told. Especially if you are a researcher who studies humility and might have an overinflated sense of his own humility. When you ask your partner how humble you are, make sure that you are not defensive like I was when they said you have areas to grow, because that is not going to help you cultivate humility. So you're going to want to ask someone who knows you well, whom you trust, and then when they tell you the hard truth that you have some areas to grow, maybe after you throw your tantrum silently in your head, you can receive that feedback because you asked for it, and then you can start working on empathy. You can start putting yourself into the cognitive and emotional perspective taking of somebody else. What was it like that I didn't think of this other person? What was it like that I kept this person waiting? What was it like that I neglected what this person was feeling? And then the biggest thing for humility is practice. Practice, practice, practice. Every day we wake up on a moving sidewalk that moves us towards narcissism. And unless every single day we make active steps to move away from it, it's going to be nearly impossible for us to cultivate a lasting humility. And then try right-sizing yourself. For some of us who are in more positions of cultural or social power or privilege, my work is right-sizing down. I need to take up less space in a situation. For other people who have been historically marginalized or are not in positions of social or cultural power, your work is to right-size up, to take up and fill the right size that you have earned and deserve. Okay, so takeaway reminder, the virtues help make life meaningful. They help improve our relationships with other people and provide us meaning. And going beyond ourselves is a sure pathway toward flourishing in a good life. Y'all ready for number 3? Right, home stretch, big idea number 3. Religion perfectly addresses existential concerns. Until it doesn't. Okay? Until it doesn't. What do I mean by this? Religion is an ideal cultural worldview. Remember those 5 existential concerns many of you have pushed out of conscious awareness and are blissfully unaware of right now, like I promised you would be? Death, isolation, groundlessness, yeah, you get it. Okay, remember all of those? Religion perfectly addresses all of those concerns. Right? Let's just borrow from maybe our shared communal identity at Hope College as a Christian college. Let's just borrow from Christianity. How do I make decisions in life? Seek God's guidance. God will tell you. I feel so isolated. Nobody knows me. God knows you. God knows your innermost thoughts. Who am I? You are a child of God. I'm terrified of death. Not a problem. Why? Eternal life. What's the meaning of my life? God can provide that. So if you were like, yeah, this guy's in my head. So religion nicely addresses all of those concerns. It's an ideal cultural worldview. And in fact, it has one advantage that other worldviews simply don't offer, that secular worldviews cannot offer, and that's literal immortality. All right, so do any of you notice that we're in Graves Hall right now, in Wynitz Auditorium, and we've got the Scott Science Center in Dimnant Chapel? Y'all are aware of those names, right? So those are names of people who have lived before us, and they're living on right now with symbolic immortality, right? We're like, oh, Graves, what a good person Graves must have been, right? Thank you, Graves. So anyway, symbolic immortality is where we live on symbolically in memory from other people. But I think Woody Allen said it best when he said, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work, I want to try to achieve immortality by not dying. Right? I don't want to live on in the hearts of my countrymen, I want to live on in my apartment. And so secular worldviews can't offer literal immortality, and that's why religion kind of has the corner market. And in fact, we did a paper in which we asked people to report their belief in literal immortality. And what we find is that they're significantly less anxious about death, in part because it makes this life so much more meaningful. Right? If it goes on and on and on, right, and I believe that, I'm going to live on, life is meaningful, and I'm not anxious about death. So we said, kind of like the Bible says, where, O death, is thy sting? We've also done some research that religion makes death meaningful. So we had people think about dying a meaningful death or a meaningless death. I promise, this was approved by the ethics board. So when death is more meaningful, we're less anxious about death. We don't even think about death. It kind of goes out of our conscious awareness. But now, how you're religious matters. And I like to think about we have these dual motives when we're thinking about religion. On the one hand, we want security, we want surety. Tell me what to believe, because that feels good. It reduces our anxiety. But on the other hand, we want to grow. We want to self-expand. But that comes with some anxiety, because what if I'm wrong? Right? Now, the security, although it feels good to you, kind of makes you intolerant of other people who disagree with you. And although the growth makes you anxious, you have much more of a stand to interact with people with whom you disagree. And openness has some benefits. So people who view religion as a quest are much more likely to be tolerant to people with different worldviews. Even though religion has all these benefits, people are leaving. Like this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon says, what if there's no afterlife? Suppose this is all we get. This is what Calvin asks. And Hobbes says, oh, what the heck, I'll take it anyway. And Calvin says, yeah, but if I'm not going to be eternally rewarded for my behavior, I'd sure like to know now. So we're actually experiencing a changing religious landscape in the United States. The number of people who identify as Christian has dropped from 90% to 63% in the past 30 years. By 2070, Christianity will not be the majority religion in the US. And most of the religious nuns, so these are not people that wear all black and hit you with a ruler, but nuns being no religious affiliation, most of them were raised in a religious faith, and they're actually religious duns. Right? So 1 in 3 Christians will leave the faith by the time they reach age 30. So we call these nuns who left the faith duns. They no longer identify as religious, they're done with religion. But why are people leaving? My research, other people's research, suggests 4 horsemen of religion's apocalypse. Right? So this is not of the apocalypse we see in religion, this might be the apocalypse of religion. So if religion is going to fade away, it might be because of one of these 4 reasons. One is called cultural stagnation. So current worldviews are no longer consistent with religious teachings, practices, or beliefs. So basically, people become more progressive, but their institutions aren't as progressive. They stay fairly conservative. We see this with belief around science, learning new information, conflict around gender, sexuality, social justice, getting more progressive. A second reason why people leave is because of religious abuse and trauma. So experiencing abuse by a religious leader through religious means or at a religious institution, so feeling judged by your identity, purity culture, being humiliated and forced to endure abusive practices. Some respondents even told us that they were forced to get up in front of an entire church auditorium and confess all the sins that they had done, which seems rather traumatic. Or some people have said just witnessing the leaders of a religion and their moral failings was enough to drive them away. Some people have overly simplistic views of suffering as a third reason. So if you've ever heard of the toxic positivity or the prosperity gospel, in psychology we call this the belief in a just world. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. It's fine as long as good things happen to you. But what about when something bad happens to you? Does that mean that you're bad? Well, surely it can't, because we can't be bad. And if you believed in an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God, was God not loving? Did God not care? Did God cause this to happen? Creates all kinds of problems. And then, the fourth is that religion for many people is a problematic label. People may no longer want to identify with religion because they don't believe in the label and the connotation. So there's this changing nature of evangelicalism in the United States. So a recent poll showed that 40% of self-identified evangelicals don't believe in the deity of Jesus. Yeah, I'm not a theologian, but I'm pretty sure that is the only thing you have to believe in to be an evangelical, which suggests that 2 out of 5 self-identified evangelicals are probably calling themselves that for socio-political terms. And so many people are saying, well, that's not me then. So when people leave, they can mean a lot of different things, right? You can stop believing in God or supernatural agents. You can pull away emotionally. You can stop following religion's mandates. Or you can discontinue socially. You can pull away from your church or your small group. But we know that pulling away is a struggle. We have research that shows that people who are done but still spiritual, or done but still religious, they have the highest degree of religious and spiritual struggles. For them, religion is not a source of comfort, it's a source of pain. So we did some cross-cultural research where we looked at 2 different types of duns. So on the one hand, we have the duns that are really done. Like they've completely discontinued, and they're not going to church anymore, they're out. And then we have the still practicing duns, right? These are the ones who are done, but they're still going to church, they're still participating. Any guess on who's got better mental health? The duns, the completely discontinued duns have better mental health, which kind of flies in the face of all this research that suggests religion is good for your mental health. That's not the case if you're done. So what this means when I share this information with churches is, first of all, you have duns in your church. Some of them might be on your leadership team, but they're still practicing. And these are the people who are hurting the most. One other thing we find is that duns are pretty socially isolated. So we ran a study where we had religious people, religious duns, and people who have never been religious, and we had them rate each other. What we find is that duns face this unique social isolation paradox. What do I mean by this? Currently, religious people really like the duns. And when we ask them why, they say, oh, it's because the religious duns, they're going to come back to church. Newsflash, when we ask the Duns, they're not coming back. And the Duns do not like the currently religious. The Duns, though, like the never religious people. They're like, you're the people I always wanted to be like. You were never religious. But the never religious people don't reciprocate those positive sentiments. So what does that mean? It's kind of like me at a middle school dance. The person that wants to dance with me, I don't want to dance with that person. The person I want to dance with, they don't want to dance with me, right? So Duns don't really have people that they want to be around, that want to be around them. So usually they end up hanging around other Duns talking about what it's like to be a Dun, how terrible church was. And while that can be helpful in the moment, it's not a path toward long-term success. And we also know that in religious contexts, religious Duns tend to conceal their identity. They don't actually share with other people that they no longer believe. And that erodes their sense of belonging. Now, one of the things that we found, and this is, I think this is one of my favorite contributions I was able to make, was that religious residue persists after people leave religion. So after people walk away from religion, religion is sticky, and it's hard to shake religion. So people continue to think, feel, and behave in ways that are still consistently religious, even though they've left. And we've done research in the United States, Netherlands, Hong Kong, the UK, New Zealand. We see this for morality, we see this for values, we see this even for how people spend their money. So why is it that religion sticks around? 3 quick reasons. One is cognitively, religion is a schema, it's a mental framework for understanding the world, and schemas are very hard to change. The second is that religion becomes a habit. Right? I call this the where's my toothpaste. So for years, my wife and Sarah and I kept the toothpaste in the bathroom on my side, on the left side. I don't know, like 6 months ago, we moved the toothpaste to her side. If you were to ask me right now where the toothpaste is, I would say it's on Sarah's side. Every night and every morning, where do you think I grab the toothpaste? My side, because it's a habit. Oh, it's not there, right? It's like a friend who left religion, and the dinner came, and she sat, and before she could eat, she said, I feel like there's something I should be doing right now. Right? It's like she knew that she wanted to pray, but she didn't believe anymore. And then finally, we're socialized into, and if we're in a religiously social context, we're more likely to demonstrate this residue. So it's like one of my friends said, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. But we know that this residue does decay. Over time, it does wane. So although it's difficult to leave religion, it affects how people think, how they feel, and how they act. Religion continues to stick with us. So we started to look at, is this religious residue, is it a good thing, bad thing, is it just descriptive? There are times when it can be taxing. This is my favorite title, Sarah gets credit for this. The title of this study is called To Hell with the Devil. Really, I just wanted to be able to put that in a title. Okay, so what we found was, this all came as Sarah and I were having dinner one night, and she was sharing, because Sarah sees a lot of clients who are undergoing religious change, and she was saying, you know, for some people, it's really hard for them to shake the negative parts of their religious upbringing. Even if they don't believe it anymore, it's just hard to shake it. And so she and I were raised in the 80s and 90s where you would go away to like a youth group camp. Did anybody go away to youth group camp? And there was this one game maybe, or an urban legend, that if you go into the bathroom and turn off the lights and look in the mirror, and you say Bloody Mary 3 times, some of you are looking at me from the audience, something horrible happens, right? You like conjure up this apparition. Some of you are like, why would you even say that? Okay, so Sarah said, you know, it's like things like that sticks around. And she's like, you don't believe in that, do you? I was like, no, I don't believe in that. And she's like, well, then go do it. And I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely, I would never do that. And I asked her to do it, and she's like, no way, I'm not going to do it. Absolutely. And we had a good laugh, but we said, well, why is it that even if we cognitively assent that that's not real, or we no longer believe that, then we're not going to do that? And we realized, we're not messing with that. Like, the stakes are simply too high, and the reward is simply too low to do that. And Sarah said, you've got to study this. So the next day I went into my lab and I told my students, we're going to study this. So what we found is that after people leave religion, and Isabella was one of my students here, she was part of that team. What we found is that after people leave religion, they're still more likely to believe in hell and the devil than people who have never been religious. And this is including people who have stopped believing in God. Even atheist Duns believe in hell and the devil more than people who have never been religious. The other thing that we found is that This religious residue includes dissonance. So when we ask people, tell us how you think God should be, and tell us how you experience God, the discrepancy between how good they expect God to be and how good they experience God to be is called religious cognitive dissonance. And that dissonance is related to negative attitudes toward God. People tend to feel forsaken by God, and that could be part of the reason why they leave. Now, what we found in our cross-cultural work is that meaning erodes after people leave religion. So this is not to suggest that people who are not religious or who have left religion have meaningless lives. That's not the case at all. These are all well above the midpoint. But meaning does take a bit of a dip after people leave religion. And so it led me to think about and conceptualize what I call the existential chasm. So for people who have left religion, they face this existential chasm in which they have to face these existential questions again. But this time they don't have the benefit of their religious worldviews. Right? They had the answers before, but now they don't. And so oftentimes this is met with a lot of negative emotion: fear, anxiety, shame, grief. If people change their religious beliefs and they've spent the majority of their life living according to those beliefs and they no longer believe them, that can evoke a lot of anger, shame, and grief. But it can also evoke a deep sense of awe, wonder, and curiosity as people try to come up with new ways of cultivating a sense of meaning and face these existential questions. So, there are some existential costs of being a religious done. They face the uncertainty of religious and spiritual struggles. They still maintain negative religious afterlife beliefs. They face unique social isolation. They conceal their identities, erodes belonging. They feel like life has a little bit less meaning. And in turn, they may seek new ways of meeting these existential needs. So religion can be a source of existential comfort and meaning. As increasingly more people leave religion, it persists. It's sticky. It leaves a residue. And walking away from religion may be existentially unsettling, but for some people, it might provide pathways toward expansion and growth. Because at the end, what most people are looking for is authentic, transcendent connection. Okay, so if we revisit our overarching research question, so what really makes for a good life? Over my 2 decades of studying this, I'm offering you 3 potential recommendations. One is to cultivate meaning in all seasons, including when we face suffering and adversity. So not just cultivating meaning when it's easy and life is going well, but also when life is challenging and you're facing adversity. The second is really invest in becoming a more virtuous person, becoming a more forgiving and humble friend, partner, colleague, leader. And finally, investing in a set of beliefs and practices that goes beyond ourselves and is authentic to our values. Right? What people want is they want to live with a sense of integrity, that their values and their behaviors are aligned, and that those values are self-transcendent and go beyond just ourselves. So my parting thought for you tonight is an honest engagement with existential realities is really what offers a pathway to flourishing. Right? So an honest and authentic engagement with these existential facts of life, that is what is going to offer a pathway to flourishing. Said differently, you have nothing to fear but the nagging possibility that you've spent most of your life avoiding existential realities rather than embracing the limits of being human and truly living. So let's go live. Let's live a good life. Thank you. We do have time for shorter speeches disguised as questions, if anybody, or if you're interested in learning more about the religious duns, that's a QR code to my book. So any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
And then Daryl, maybe you could just repeat questions.
Yes, and I'll repeat questions for those who can't hear, as well as others.
Daryl,
Yes.
with all your work, what's the dividing line or barrier to studying NDEs?
Okay, so the question is, what's the dividing line to study near-death experiences? Yeah, that's a great question. So it's not something that I've studied. I have a colleague, though, who is studying and is now moving to the Department of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, Dr. Julie Exline, and she'll be leading a team studying NDEs, near-death experiences, and other types of phenomenon. So I encourage you to check out DOPS, DOPS, at the University of Virginia. That's a great question. Yes?
So, Elon Musk recently said that the problem with civilization, the great poison in civilization, was empathy. That we need to have less empathy. Do you think it's possible for him to have a good life?
I'm going to get a drink real quick. The question was, Elon Musk asserted that the problem with humanity was that we had too much empathy. And so I think the question behind that is, do I agree? And the question is, do I think that Elon can live a meaningful, good life? I wish him all the best. Now, to his idea, I strongly doubt that the central feature of human downfall is our overabundance of empathy. I think if psychology has taught us anything, it's our lack of empathy that allows us to perpetrate unspeakable and horrific horrors to other people. And in most of the work that we've done on virtue, empathy is the central mechanism by which virtues operate. We have to be empathic towards other people. If I were to encourage people to cultivate one thing, it might be that, right? Become more empathic. So I don't think that that's a downfall of civilization. It might be one of our shining contributions to life. Yes?
Thank you very much. My question is, are you convinced with the shifting terrain when you estimate that in 2050, religion is on the decline? I'm thinking of James G. Fraser, the Golden Brother, in the study of religion and nation, who says religion will soon be extinct. But we see religion continues to flourish, and with religion we are dealing with something that's bipolar. The physical realities we are using to estimate and project into the future, but religion is also about transcendental realities. That which we cannot explain, probably that's why you're saying it is answers for everything. It keeps us going. I personally, because I also focus on that in the work, telling you how accurate are those predictions. When we see this failing to be extinct over historical times.
Yeah, great question. So, is religion actually going to decline? Like, is it actually going to go away? I think, if I'm summarizing correctly, and isn't there something kind of more to religion that might persist? I mean, I'm fairly convinced that the numbers are suggesting that it's declining in the U.S., right, and in other parts of the Western world. But there are parts in other parts of the world where religion is on the increase. That Africa is becoming increasingly more religious, and they're seeing a surge in religion. I'm not, though, convinced that religious beliefs will stop. I tend to, this is probably just me self-aggrandizing what I study because I need to think that it's more important. I actually think that we're on the precipice of a spiritual or religious revolution, where we're going to see a shift in the way in which people engage with the spiritual or the transcendent. And for me, though, that doesn't mean that any of our spiritual or existential motivations have gone away. I don't think that we'll suddenly wake up and say, I have no more spiritual or existential needs anymore. I just think how we get those needs met and the instantiation of religion, how it's expressed, will look different, but I don't think that it'll ever completely go away. Yes?
Daryl, you mentioned that these three primary tenets that you were talking about, sometimes they can vary between the 5 or 6 generations that are in society today. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how there are both similarities between these 6 generations and where there might be 1, 2, or 3 distinct differences.
Generational differences in terms of like religion or
Age
for everything I've kind of talked about? Oh, wow, that's a great question. Okay. So how do I conceptualize what I've talked about with age? No, that's a great question. I'll try to do my best. So one of the things that we find is that as people get older, they're actually less concerned and less bothered by existential realities. Right? So some of the research they found among older adults, when you remind them of death, they actually become more generous, more pro-social, more giving, because they're more comfortable talking about, and they're more kind of used to these existential realities. We tend to see that older generations tend to be more religious, and this is kind of both in terms of age and cohort effects. So younger generations are less religious, and as people age, people tend to get a little bit more religious. And then I think everybody has opportunities to be virtuous at any age. It might just look differently. And I think that one of the opportunities of mid to later life is kind of this opportunity to step more into generativity and being able to give back a little bit more. So that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yes?
So you talked about isolation and how avoiding that can lead to more meaning. Do you think with the rise of AI chatbots, AI like partners, robots, do you think that's a way that people can find meaning, or is that just coping? What would you say?
So what's the role of AI when people want to avoid? Right. So that's a good question. I mean, it's an empirical question. My sense would be that there is something very powerful about a human connection in being with and talking to another human that is powerfully transformative above me receiving a algorithmic programmed response that is designed to kind of make me feel better. I feel that's totally, like if AI says I love you, that feels very different than if a human were to tell me that I loved. Yes?
Do you know, or have you done research on like people that don't believe in any kind of afterlife and how that affects their well-being or fears of death?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what about people who don't believe in an afterlife? How do they deal with death? So many people do not believe in an afterlife, and they probably might have slightly higher death anxiety than people who do believe in an afterlife, just kind of like on average. But some research has found that when you remind people who don't believe in an afterlife that they're going to die, they're more likely to invest in things like science and technology for indefinite life extensions. So kind of like freezing oneself, right, in a tube. So things that can kind of forestall death but are not supernatural explanations to that. Yes?
So you mentioned about the increase in guns, as well as the reduction of religion, particularly in the U.S., and this shift regarding religion and spirituality. But I also saw you say about those guns are looking for a desire for transcendental connection. Have you done any research or have any ideas as far as what are they doing in order to see that? Because I do see a reduction in religion and more people going towards spirituality.
Yep, that's a great question. So as people are leaving religion, they're looking for transcendent connection and spirituality. Where are they getting those needs met? So we currently have a big grant where we're studying that right now. We're calling it spiritual yearning. So they're yearning for something more. So we're seeing that they're looking for things that emulate religion. So they're like religion adjacent experiences. Things like the Enneagram, things like psychedelics are taking an uptick because that's a way that people are thinking of having spiritual experiences without religion. Some people really get into things like Peloton, right? There's a community, we're in it, right? So it's community, so basically ways that are trying to tick the individual boxes of religion without a comprehensive way. Yeah, but check back, we'll know more soon. All right, thank you so much, I appreciate it, have a great night.